Hi folks. I've been asked the question why World War One proved to be so disappointing that by the end of the war, by 1919, so many different groups of people felt a major sense of letdown from the First World War. And that's kind of a complicated question. There's multiple reasons why people in various parts of the world felt a major sense of letdown. Fundamentally, obviously, World War One took millions and millions of lives and wreaked great destruction. So you would think at the end of the war, many people would feel a sense of disappointment. That's kind of natural. But I think it goes beyond that. World War One is a disappointment to many people, in part because of how high hopes had been raised, especially after 1917 when the United States came into the war. President Woodrow Wilson, with his 14 points, really attempted to change the nature of the conflict and turned it into kind of a noble crusade. Wilson said that this was going to be a war to make the world safe for democracy, that it was going to be a war to end all wars. In other words, just do this one time and we'll fix what's wrong on a global scale with humanity, and we'll never have to fight in the trenches again. Wilson also injected into his lofty ideas such as self-determination of peoples, the implication that humanity should have the right of self-government, that the peoples, the nations of Earth, should not be under the control of other powers. And obviously, in the period we're talking about, much of planet Earth is colonized. The great empires span the globe. And so if you lived in the British Empire or in the French Empire or in any of these other sort of subject territories, of course, people heard the words of Woodrow Wilson and they thought that this war is going to get us our independence finally. So there are going to be some winners at the end of World War One in terms of their aspirations, but many other people are going to be disappointed. So I guess if you are Polish, Poland had disappeared, had been dismembered by neighboring countries. The Poles are going to get a reconstructed Poland. Likewise, many of the constituent parts of the Austro-Hungarian Empire are going to get their own countries. So not always in the formulation that they had wanted, but they're going to basically get self-government. But then all the Arab nations of the Middle East are going to be disappointed. They thought that by backing the Allies, they would get independent countries. Instead, you have a system called the mandate system, which is another sort of an incarnation of European imperialism. Likewise, people like the Vietnamese imagined that French Indochina would go away if national self-determination of peoples was implemented. Vietnam is not going to become an independent nation yet. It has decades of fighting before that happens to go, all the way up into the period of the American stage of the Vietnam War. So lots of people are going to get their hopes raised, and by the end of the Paris conference, which stretches for months, they're going to go away disappointed. Some of the allies, like the Italians, are disappointed. They thought that Italy, if it joined the right side, the winning side in World War One, that Italy would get rewarded by large amounts of territory. Instead, Italy gets a tiny bit of Austria, the South Tyrol, and Italy suffers massive casualties in the war. And many Italians felt cheated by the settlement. Likewise, obviously, the losers, especially Germany, are going to be left embittered. The Germans were forced in the Treaty of Versailles to accept a guilt clause that basically said that Germany was totally to blame for World War One, which, if you look at the roots of the conflict, you know that all sides are to blame, not just the losers. So that's pretty disappointing when you think about the fact that World War I really sets up the conditions for the rise of fascism. Most people by 1920 realized that the Versailles Treaty really settled nothing, and that a future war is not only possible but probable. That's pretty disappointing. So many of the people who had suffered, who had lost loved ones in World War I, realized by 1920 that those sacrifices had largely been in vain, that the world was still as messed up and divided and contentious as before. Then you have other kind of smaller constituencies that are probably upset. If you were a farmer, for example, in North America, in the US or Canada during World War I, you made a lot of money. When the war ends, that agricultural period of prosperity collapses. So World War I turns out to not be what anyone thought it would be. But looking at the time here, that's probably about enough to explain why so many people are disappointed by that conflict. And of course, the United States, even though World War I proves that we are, in fact, a new superpower, the United States is going to retreat into isolationism. That's a signal that many Americans believe that intervention in world affairs was probably a mistake. Have a great weekend. In many places in the U.S., the weather is still great, unless you're on the Gulf Coast, where right now there's more storm activity brewing. But enjoy your weekend. I'll talk to you later.